Yo, what's up guys? Today we're talking about double DDs, more specifically the Con by HBB and the Zero by Crinacle. Now, the main question is, how do these two compare to each other? Well, they basically do the same thing, which is an overall clean signature with a heavy sub-bass focus and try to recreate that feeling of a subwoofer, which I think they do fairly well, but just with different approaches. The Zero, for example, is more of a traditional Harman tuning with the 2 to 8K region following the Harman target, whereas the Con is slightly adjusted from 1.5 to 4K, resulting in less fatigue because of less upper mids, but instead has the drawback of a more recessed feeling mid-range and vocals. Sub-bass is very textured, no bleed, and has great impact on both, with the exception that the Con slams just a little harder because it's tuned with more bass, although the low end is still not as deep and extended compared to a real subwoofer, which is to be expected. Now, for the bass, I prefer the Con more because it's slightly more impactful, but when it comes to mids, I like the Zeros better because it's more forward and less recessed and quote-unquote sounds more correct, although at the expense of being more fatiguing than the Con. But before we move on, let's address the dreaded mid-bass scoop that haunts many people's libraries. To be blunt, if you primarily listen to anything with a lot of male vocals, bass guitars, or kick drums, like rock and hip-hop, then probably pass on both of these because they lack the mid-bass slam and impact to truly immerse yourself in the music. I often just found myself thinking, yeah, the sub-bass is great, but where's the rest of the low-end energy? For example, at the 3:30 mark on Time by Hikaru Utada, I feel a rumbling, but the song just ends up becoming too safe and flat because there's no mid-bass to give that feeling of intensity and immersion. It feels like a part of the song's soul is missing, and another example of this is Walking by Denzel Curry. Now, I have been bumping to the song in my car for the last week or so when I heard it on the Con and the Zero, I was genuinely confused. The kick drums and snare sounds thinner, lighter, and even slightly sharp. Denzel, on the other hand, is rapping like he's tired or indifferent, even though the sub bass is very lively, which leads to this odd contrast with the sub bass being energetic, but everything else lacking the energy. Most of the instruments on the song sound light and sharp while the tone is trying to sound heavy, so it was a very weird experience. But that aside, in terms of treble, both the Con and Zero are relatively the same past 8K. Maybe the Con has a little more air, but both have a good sense of staging, although more flat and not 3D, but still airy enough regardless. Now, another IEM, the Quarks DSP, which is also similarly tuned, is smoother in terms of upper mids and treble, but that doesn't mean the Zero and Con are bad dynamically, it's just that they're not as even as the DSP. In terms of imaging, detail, and separation, they're all in the same ballpark, which is average around the area level. But scaling wise, the DSP comes out on top, followed by the Con and then the Zero. More specifically, the Zeros sound better than the Con at mid volume because of the more pronounced upper mids, but at higher volumes, the lowered 1.5 to 4K region on the Con makes it less fatiguing than the Zeros. In conclusion, I would still take the Quarks DSP over both of them because it has better dynamics and sounds less sharp and thin, even though both the Con and the Zero have better sub-bass detail and an airier staging. The main issue is that they sound less refined when compared to the DSP, which is only $15, and I don't think the difference in the bass and stage is enough to sway me personally, but if I were to pick between the Con and the Zero, I would probably take the Con since it's less fatiguing and scales better. Anyways, that's it for this comparison. I have a top 5 budget IEM video on the way, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, thanks for watching, drop your thoughts below, and peace.